Pokémon FireRapidash by Celtic Magician. Guess you could say that I was out of touch with the mainstream games. I never really understood that emotional bond people always go on about between themselves and their Pokémon. I've always been more analytical about the games and thought that these creatures were nothing more than pixels which had to be strategically used in order to win. Maybe that's why one ROM hack totally freaked me out. It kind of gave me a rude awakening that I was really missing with these games. Before I go on, yes, this ROM seems to have been removed from the internet after I had played it, so don't bother looking for it. It's a stupid cliche, I know, but it's the utmost truth. I even went scouting for this thing again to share it with you, but to no avail, so I guess for now you're just stuck with my story. I used to play Pokémon when I was young. Blue, red, yellow, silver, gold, crystal, yeah, I played them all. I only lost interest in the games after Ruby and Sapphire were released. The story had become too repetitive for my liking, and the Pokémon were just plain ridiculous in my opinion. There was just no point to continue playing. Since then, I had turned my attention to ROM hacks of the Pokémon games. I often found that they had a better storyline and sometimes even some impressive Fakemon which could easily rival even the likes of Game Freak and their failures of Pokémon designs. ROM hacks were just more fulfilling for me. Then one day, I decided to go looking for a new ROM for myself. I had played the other ROM hacks I owned so much that I was beginning to get bored with them and needed something fresh. So, after a fair amount of searching via Google, a name finally caught my eye. Pokémon ROM hack FireRapidash version. I clicked on the link and was brought to a rather shady-looking web page with nothing more than a download link for the ROM and a brief description which merely explained that it was a hack of Fire Red. I hesitated for a moment. This page screamed possible malicious virus, and I questioned whether or not I should continue. However, this is the first ROM hack I found after pages and pages of searching that I had never heard of before. Curiosity can be a powerful thing. Bracing myself for the impending virus warning, I clicked the link to download the ROM. Everything seemed to go without a hitch, even when opening the file. It seemed like a legit ROM hack, and I was relieved to finally know that I wasn't going to make my computer explode horrifically. I booted up the file in my emulator and quickly brought myself to the start page after the Game Freak logo popped up. As a first impression, I was pleasantly surprised. The title screen was really well done and had a very appealing image of a Rapidash replacing where Charizard would have been. It looked as though Nintendo had officially made the game themselves. It was that good. I pressed enter and skipped through the controls and the story explanations to get to the main game. The game started off the way most do, with Professor introducing you to the Pokémon world and allowing you to choose names and gender. I chose the male trainer for this adventure and named him Red, since I was feeling uncreative that day. Additionally, I named my rival Douche just for the hell of it. From there, the story progressed normally like it does in Fire Red, which I don't mind horribly since the original Red, Blue, and Yellow games were amongst my favorite to play. Besides, if the title screen was any indication of what the hack might have to offer, I was game for it. The only thing that was a bit jarring was the hacked text. It was either a different font or size from the original. I only noticed this after talking to Mom and the rest of the people in Pallet Town, where they had very minor alterations in what they were saying. After venturing into the tall grass and having Professor Oak lead me to his lab, it was time for me to choose my starter Pokémon. Because Brock is the first gym leader in these games, I typically chose either Bulbasaur or Squirtle as my starter, and today I wanted something that was going to have an excellent defense in the long run. So I headed towards the middle Pokeball on the table. However, when I hit the corresponding key for A button, an image of a Vaporeon came up instead of the usual Squirtle. I have to admit, I had to contain my excitement and not click yes when I asked if I was sure I wanted the strong water-type Pokemon, because if Squirtle was replaced, the other two must have been as well. I checked the other two Pokeballs. To the right, replacing Bulbasaur was an Execute, and to the left was a Ponyta, fitting as his evolved form placed the titular Charizard for the game. After some consideration, I decided to go for the Vaporeon. Ponyta was a fire type and didn't have very good stats as far as my experience went with using that Pokemon, and I wasn't the fondest of Execute, regardless of Executor being a potential powerhouse. But when I selected yes for the Vaporeon, I was met with a very strange response from Oak. "I don't think you want that Pokemon, try another." Baffled since it wouldn't let me have it, I moved to my second choice of Execute, and the same thing happened. It seemed I had no choice but to choose the Ponyta, and I reluctantly did so. I only hoped that the creator of this hack had swapped in some useful Pokemon to use for Pewter City. There was no prompt for me asking if I wanted to nickname the Pokemon, not that I needed it anyway since I don't nickname my Pokemon, so I went to check its summary to see the damage. The Ponyta I had was female, it had a timid nature, and the ability Run Away. Additionally, the Pokemon seemed to have a preset nickname, Amber. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at this point, and didn't even bother to look at the Ponyta's stats. I was seriously beginning to wonder if this hack was nothing more than a reproduction of a Rapidash fangirl's fantasy. Regardless, I continued the game and watched, disgruntled as Douche chose the Vaporeon I so coveted. Things had to get better somehow. Next came the tutorial battle between you and your rival. Douche's Vaporeon was a male and seemed to have no nickname when it was sent out, so this Ponyta was the only thing affected by that particular coding from what I could tell. Thankfully, my rival's Vaporeon didn't know any Water-type moves, but after a couple of turns of Tail Whip, he made quick work of my Ponyta with a single tackle attack. Needless to say, I wasn't impressed and sped through the text as Douche gloated about his victory. From here, my rival took off and I was made to walk towards Professor Oak, who told me that he was sorry for my loss, and that it seemed my Ponyta wanted to make it up to me. I don't recall this occurrence in any previous games, so it was an interesting tidbit to say the least, but it did little to quell my disappointment towards the Pokemon that was forced upon me. After this, the game proceeded as normal, unfortunately for me, as I had to continue to train my Ponyta against every wild Pokemon that appeared. There seemed to be no catchable grass types, so I knew I would have to get creative when it came to defeating Brock. I ended up catching a Nidoran, female, to raise it until it learned Double Kick to help me out of this scenario. Admittedly, I would have become bored with the game if it weren't for the comments of the NPCs in Pewter City. They weren't much, just a handful of comments regarding the Ponyta on my team. Compliments such as the shininess of her coat or how well behaved she was. There were little things of course, but they were interesting. Whoever made this hack made sure that the starter was well involved. I was curious to see where it would lead. After all, there are 8 gyms. There was still plenty of time for further story development. After much grinding, I managed to defeat Brock, and things were fairly smooth after that. I managed to compile a decent team including a Pidgeotto, Nidorina, soon to be Nidoqueen when the time was right, Pikachu, and Butterfree. Amber became easier to deal with after she learned Ember at level 14, but she was still one of the weakest Pokemon on my team. I only hoped that once she evolved into a Rapidash, her stats would improve, otherwise I would box her. It would be a while since I could encounter decent fire types though, so I had to make do. However, something seemed odd about Amber since the Pewter City gym victory. It was so subtle that for a long while, I thought it was just a trick of the eye, but every time she was sent into battle, the expression on the back sprite appeared to be frowning, as if she was sad for some reason. I would constantly check her summary every time I noticed the expression, but there seemed to be no indication of it. After a while, I assumed that the ROM was doing what most ROMs do best, lag, therefore causing some of the pixels in Ponyta's face to distort. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have assumed it was something so simple. By the time I beat the Cerulean Gym, it had become customary for me to speak with the NPCs and other trainers frequently because of the additional comments about Amber. After the defeat of my rival while heading to Nugget Bridge, however, I started to notice that the nice friendly comments I had begun receiving earlier had started to go down south. Comments such as, "That Ponyta's pretty weak, eh? Maybe you should get rid of it," started to become more of the norm. While it's true, I would swap out Amber for Growlithe if I couldn't help but feel a little shocked at the allegations. I thought Pokemon games, hacked or not, were supposed to encourage the main character and praise their Pokemon as strong, even if they were realistically weak. When I defeated the final trainer on Nugget Bridge and spoke to him, another message struck me. "You have such a pretty Ponyta, but why does it look so sad?" I shuddered. No, those were just distorted pixels I was seeing earlier. The NPC was just stating what they are seeing, not how the Pokemon actually feels. I mentally slapped myself for even letting my mind wander into such an area of thought. Amber wasn't really sad, no Pokemon could be. They're just pixels in a game. So then, why did I pay such close attention to her face after that? Why did I care? As I continued onward to Vermilion City, things seemed to become worse. Trainers kept questioning Amber and my treatment of her, and Amber's back sprite continued to look more and more depressed with each passing battle. It was starting to become too obvious to blow off or ignore, and I began wondering what the creator of this hack was thinking when they made it. Vermilion City itself unleashed a new can of worms to the whole ordeal. It started with the chairman of the Pokémon fan club. I went there to speak with him in order to get the long-awaited bike voucher, but his words seemed to be different than what I remembered when he went to gloat about his Pokémon. My favorite is Rapidash, but I see you don't like that Pokémon. I had this bike voucher for someone to listen to me brag about my Pokémon, but seeing as you can't appreciate the majesty of Rapidash, I'll save it for someone more deserving. No matter how many times I spoke to the chairman, I would still get the same response and no bike voucher. Frustrated, I spoke to the other people of the fan club, and that's when it became really strange. The people of the fan club, the residents of the city, even members of the Vermilion Gym were all saying the same thing. Oh, your Ponyta doesn't seem to like you very much. Maybe you should treat it better? I don't know why it bothered me so much. Normally I couldn't have cared about the opinions of NPCs, but for some reason, I couldn't get over how angry I was. I couldn't understand it. Why were they so focused on how I was treating the Ponyta? What was this hack trying to prove? Fuming, I decided to head out of town to do some training with my Pokémon, especially Amber. She was at level 39, due to my excessive team grinding, just one level away from evolving. At that point, I was under the impression that if Amber finally evolved into Rapidash, people would leave me alone about her. That's when it happened. I sent out Amber on a lower-leveled Drowsy, and selected an attack. Any attack she did would have killed it, with 1 or 2 hits anyway. But Amber wouldn't listen to me. Amber won't obey, the screen said. I frowned. She should be listening to me. She wasn't a traded Pokémon. I selected another move. Amber turned away. Again. Amber is loafing around. A few more rounds of this passed and I finally gave up on Amber. However, Amber wouldn't even switch out. I had no choice but to run. Amber fled using Runaway. After the fiasco was over, I went into my party to switch out Amber of the lead position. However, Amber was no longer there. Confused, I went back to Vermilion City and checked the PC in the Poké Center, thinking that this hack may have glitched, and she was in the box. Not there either. Not sure where else Amber might have gone. I shrugged her off and turned my attention to beating Lieutenant Sarge. After I beat the Vermilion Gym, another oddity was waiting for me outside. One of Professor Oak's aides appeared. Red, there's a situation going on in Cinnabar Island. Professor Oak has asked me to take you there immediately. The option for yes or no popped up. Figuring this was finally the storyline I was looking for, I selected yes and the screen faded to black. When the game resumed, I was standing in front of the burned-down mansion of Cinnabar. A crowd had gathered around the building, which seemed strange to me, so I started talking to them. Supposedly there was a Rapidash on the roof of the mansion, which I could eventually see as I drew closer to the building, acting strangely. I was surprised to see my rival, Douche, standing by the door to the mansion, so I approached him. Talking to him, however, left me with both chills and confusion. Hey Red, isn't that your Rapidash? What did you do to it? My Rapidash? Last I checked, Amber never evolved. After speaking to Douche, the music for Cinnabar Island silenced and the ground shook. A text box appeared on the screen. Amber's flash fire, it said. Suddenly, a sound which I can only describe as a high-pitched and prolonged squeak sounded as the screen flashed white, pulsated red, then faded to white again. When things came to normal, I was shocked by what I saw. Cinnabar was destroyed. The neighboring gym was gone, as were all the people that were there previously. Tiles of lava were everywhere, replacing the missing buildings and adding to the landscape, bubbling with in-game animation. All that remained intact was my character sprite, the mansion, and Amber. I clicked on the arrow keys, hoping I could move about, but it was pointless. I was stuck. This scene made me anxious for some reason. The whole thing did. I wasn't sure what was going on at this point, or why. I've never been this enthralled in the story of a video game. Finally, after what seemed like minutes, a new text box appeared on screen. Amber doesn't like you very much. Maybe you should have treated it better. The words "should have" appeared underneath "you should treat it better," like some form of subliminal message. There was a small arrow prompting for more text, so I mindlessly pressed A. You did not want Amber? The option box for yes and no appeared. I hesitated for a moment before selecting yes. I did want the Vaporeon after all, and there was no point in lying. More text. I knew it. I stopped for a moment when I saw this, and felt a chill go through me. I found it strange that the text suddenly switched from third to first person like that. I looked at the flashing arrow in the bottom right-hand corner of the box, and continued. Amber isn't sure if it can trust you. Another option for yes and no. I selected yes, unsure of what the question was, really. Amber responded, no. You did this. With that, the Rapidash jumped down from the roof and approached me. Then, with its cry and a flashing screen, I was flung into battle. Estranged Pokemon Amber attacked, the text said as all the sprites slid into place. I took a closer look at Amber. Sure enough, her nickname was in place of where Rapidash should be, and she was level 40. But her face. I have never seen such an expression on a Pokemon sprite. It was angry, sad, hurt, and anguish all rolled into one. Her mouth hung open in that horrible disfigured frown which had started when she was still a Ponyta. The hacker for this ROM was one hell of a spriter, because I had a really hard time looking at Amber for more than a few seconds at a time at this point. Nidorina was the Pokemon sent out, being the next in line after Amber had, I had guessed it by now, ran away. I figured I could end this battle rather quickly, considering the majority of my Pokemon were a lot stronger than Amber stat-wise, but every time my Nidorina moved, her attack would miss. Amber's moveset seemed to have changed as well. From what I could tell, she had relearned Stomp even though I'd replaced it with Agility 2 levels ago, and had somehow managed to learn the move Frustration, which she used frequently alongside Fury Attack and the already known Takedown. What's more, she was causing hefty amounts of damage, and I found myself struggling with the few potions I had at my disposal to keep my team afloat. Additionally, there was something strange that would happen with the passing of each turn. The screen would quickly fade to black and then back again, but each time it came back, Amber's appearance seemed to change. I began to notice it about 3 turns into the battle, and I'm not sure how many turns passed to see it at its most severe. 12 maybe? But Amber started to become thinner, her features sunken, and her color turning into more of a grayscale monochrome. By the end, she looked more like a gaunt, shiny Rapidash instead of the way Rapidash should normally look. Her now protruding ribcage and blackened eyes accented that dreadful gaping mouth. I can't remember if I had started to cry at this point. I remember that I felt horrible, depressed even. It was almost like watching an animal starve to death right before my eyes, and the pain was just as real as watching the Rapidash sprite decay away like that. Finally, after being brought down to my last Pokemon, my Butterfree, a message popped up. Amber is tired. The battle still continued, but now I noticed that the Rapidash was no longer attacking and my attacks could finally land. I used Confusion on Amber. She went down to about half her health, in the yellow. Another message appeared. Amber would like you to finish it. I can't express how painful it was for me to press the corresponding A button to unleash the second and final attack on the Rapidash. I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. It was as if I was killing the thing. When the fainting animation played for Amber, there was no text that followed. Even when the battle music changed to the victory music, no experience was gained by my Butterfree. Coming back onto the overworld, Amber was still standing in front of me. You did this, the text box said, and then the Rapidash began to rotate on the spot. It was slow at first, but it began to build in speed as the text continued. For the sake of brevity, it says you did this 35 times. I'm not sure how long the wall of text lasted. I kept plowing through it with the A, just wanting this whole thing to be over with. Finally, the text box disappeared. Then, Amber, still spinning at a rapid pace, erupted into blue flame. Her cry went from normal to high-pitched to a low pitch as she then careened herself to the left side of the screen and into the water where she disappeared. Then, Blaine's sprite slowly emerged from the bottom of the screen and called out to my character. I can't relay everything he said to me. My memory isn't that good. All I know is that the text was a blatant mix of original and hacked, and was somewhat jarring to read. To paraphrase, he told me that the scene with Amber was a tragedy, that she was a Pokemon so desperate for acceptance from her master that she unleashed a fury on everything around her. He turned to me. and I swear to you I will never forget what he said next. Do you know why this happened, Red? It's because you've forgotten to treat your Pokémon with love and respect. You have forgotten to treat your Pokémon with love and respect. I remember those words. Those were the ones that Oak says to your rival after you defeat him at the Elite Four. I never really took note of those words back then, but now that they were directed at me, I felt differently. I wondered, was all of this really my fault? Was it really my fault that these horrible things were happening in this ROM because I didn't treat my Pokémon as though they had thoughts and feelings of their own? I didn't know what to think anymore. Blaine continued with his speech after that, now being more direct with me. He scolded me for using Pokémon as tools, and that I should be ashamed of what I did to the Rapidash. To wrap things up, he told me that he would never tell anyone about what transpired if I were to do one thing: give up training and change my ways. A final yes-no option appeared, and I selected yes. The emulator closed itself. I couldn't find any of the files for the ROM after either. I picked up my old Game Boy Color a couple of nights ago and started to play through the original games again. Things seemed different now as I played them. I paid more attention to my Pokémon and smiled about the nostalgia of the original storyline. I'm considering getting caught up with the games, finally, to see how this world has been evolving. It's been so long since I've played an official game. I'm into my silver version now, and from what I can tell, there is still one thing bothering me. You see, I had made a point to catch a Ponyta or Rapidash in all of my games and name it Amber, to somehow make up for what I had done. But no matter how hard I try, it's not the same. These Pokémon are not Amber, nor will they ever be. I'm trapped in my own guilt, remembering the images of that poor Rapidash. I don't think that this empty feeling will ever leave me because of it. I guess in a way, this is suitable punishment for my actions. Because after all, I did this. That was Pokémon FireRapidash. Final thoughts? Extremely overly cliché. Before I bring up anything else in the story though, I need to bring up one massive problem that happens right in the start of the story. It acknowledges that it's a stupid cliché for it to be a ROM hack that's just magically gone, but it says that it's the truth. But it's not the truth, because this story is obviously not real, so that's not an acceptable answer. Not only did it use the cliché, but it tried to justify itself within the story with something that we know is obviously not true, using a whole new cliché in the process. This hurts the story far more than just bringing up that the cliché is there in the first place. Writers at home, never do this. On top of that, the story is constantly falling into clichés. It's almost frustrating how run-of-the-mill this story is. It feels like the author just took bits and pieces from every creepypasta they've read and put them in without rhyme or reason. For instance, they use the cliché of having the player constantly panicking, then shrugging off things that were wrong in the game. But since this is a ROM hack, the things happening at that point were not even remotely unbelievable. The author must have been putting in that stupid trope without even realizing that the only reason why players in other stories panic is because they aren't playing ROM hacks. The absolute best example of the author just taking things from other stories and shoving them all together without any understanding of how they work is the self-blaming. During the entire second half of the story up until the very final lines, the player of the game thinks that they've treated the Ponyta wrong and that it's all their fault. I want you to go in the description and read the story on your own at its source. The player did absolutely nothing wrong at any point in this game. The player, in no way whatsoever, abused or mistreated the Ponyta. The closest you could say was how the player wanted to replace it. However, the Ponyta could not possibly know this because it isn't a haunted game, it's just a ROM hack. The author had no goddamn idea what he or she was doing with this story. I've got no idea why this one was requested as much as it was. That's it for this creepypasta and the second day of the second 7 days of Creepypasta special. Tomorrow I'll be tackling another highly requested story with Pokémon Death Snap. Okay, that one wasn't highly requested, but Brandon told me to do it. If you want to write your own story, help peer edit a story, or even just read the stories early, check out the description where you'll find a link to the Creepypasta section of my forum. You'll also find a link to the playlist of every single Creepypasta reading I've done. Also, you'll find the links to the Twitch channel and archive playlist for Pass the Controller Please. a weekly charity stream that I co-host every single Friday from 5 till 7 p.m. EST to raise money to bring games to children in hospitals. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, sweet dreams.